Hello everyone, welcome to my study first and foremost. Welcome also to my YouTube channel, which I finally created. If you follow me on Instagram or Tumblr for some time, then you'll know that this project has long been on my mind. It's something that I wanted to do, to review books, to speak about the things that I read, but various factors such as busyness with university, my own incorrigible perfectionism have stood in the way. I figured that if I was going to make a video, it would have to be perfect. And for a video to be perfect, it would take pretty much a lifetime of work to put into it, which means that from the very beginning, I would be unable to achieve what I wanted to achieve. I finally put that aside. So here I am, just going to go with what I'm able to do rather than what I should do in any kind of completist, perfectionist sense. I think that's, in the end, the only way to realize your goals. You can set them aside because you're not going to achieve them in the perfect sense that you want to achieve them, but then you end up doing nothing. So here I am. I am not going to have this first video be about me and why I read, for instance, why I am engaging in all this activity. I will probably make a separate video about that at some point, especially if people are interested in that. I've shared my story on Instagram or Tumblr, wherever, in the past. I wouldn't mind speaking of it again. So what I'm going to do, what you'll hopefully be doing with me, is going into Leonid Tsypkin's novel Summer in Baden-Baden, which is the first book that I decided to talk about. Here it is. You can see this wonderful cover. It's published by New Directions, which is one of my favorite publishers. I would very much recommend you checking them out. I think the website is ndbooks.com. ND is in New Directions. Otherwise, just Google it. They have some great pieces of literature in there, more obscure work, also some better known work. For instance, Sartre's Nausea is published by them. They have some Borges that's published. So you get a good mix of classics and also more obscure works like Tsypkin's work, for instance. It is obscure. Not many people have heard of it, which is a sad thing. Susan Sontag, who wrote the introduction to this edition and to other editions, actually did a lot to try to popularize the novel. I think it was she who first discovered the book in England somewhere, in some out of the way little bookshop, and she wrote the introduction for a new edition and told everyone, well, hey, look, this is a book that you've been ignoring and you shouldn't have been, because it's an incredible book. So I will be speaking about Summer in Baden-Baden. Leonid Tsypkin, I think I will start with his life a little bit before I get to the book. He's a very interesting, sad character in a way. He was born in 1926 in Soviet Russia. He was a medical doctor. Actually, he published over 100 journals internationally on subjects, treatments of polio and cancer, for instance. So he was primarily a doctor. However, unlike Chekhov or Bulgakov, who were also doctors, he never actually published literature, fiction in his lifetime, for reasons which I think I'll go into. Certainly Sontag goes into it in the introduction. Basically, he was given a very hard time by the Soviet establishment. When his son emigrated to the United States, he was basically denied a visa to go visit him, to leave the country, which was very usual at that time. To get a visa was something very special in the Soviet era, because the authorities did not want people, especially the intelligentsia, leaving the country, potentially never coming back and doing God knows what in the United States. This, I mean, the fact that his son emigrated to the United States actually meant that Tsypkin was fired from his position. He got a doctorate in science, and then later on, he was basically barred from working. Um, so that was a tumultuous time in terms of Tsypkin being unable to exercise his profession. What he what Tsypkin did on the side, you can call it on the side, I suppose. It wasn't his profession. He wasn't able to publish and to live off of it. What he did was write. So he wrote some poems early on. But what he now, at least, is most well known for is this novel, Summer in Baden-Baden, which he was writing from 1977 to 1981, but it was actually published in English for the first time some 20 years after his death in 2001, and it was only published 7 days 7 days before Tsypkin died in 1982 in an emigre journal in the United States, and it's actually, I mean, it's a it's an interesting fact. It's another sad fact. Tsypkin actually died on his birthday, March 20th. He was born and died on March 20th. I don't know of anyone actually who famous famous people, that is, who died on their birthday. Certainly not any writer who did. But that's how it is. What he was writing in this period between 77 and 81 was a fictional account, but that was steeped in biography, that was steeped in facts, and it was all centered on Dostoevsky, more particularly on Dostoevsky's life in a short, relatively short period when he was traveling abroad, when he left his native Russia, his beloved Russia, and he went to Baden-Baden in order to recover from the stresses that he was facing in Russia. But he also went there, at least in part, for a large part maybe, in order to gamble. Baden-Baden was a big gambling place, casinos. Many famous Russians, such as Turgenev and Gonchaov, were also there around that time. In fact, Tsypkin recounts Dostoevsky's encounters with them, which are invariably negative because, well, Dostoevsky wasn't very pleased with them, so to speak. Anyway, the story has many layers. It starts, I suppose. This is my cat's tail. I apologize for that. She always wants to be around and part of things, so she's probably going to make her appearance in more than one video. Her name's Tai Tai, and if you've followed me on on Instagram or Tumblr, then I'm sure you've seen her. She makes plenty of appearances in general. Anyway, got sidetracked there. So the story within a story is Dostoevsky's time in Summer in Baden-Baden. Basically, it starts with Tsypkin's lifelong passion concerning Dostoevsky. Dostoevsky was his hero, his literary love, you might say. Which, I mean, if you if you know me, then I'm in a very similar position. In fact, right there behind me, that's old Dostoevsky. I am going to be talking about him plenty throughout these videos. It was the same for Tsypkin. He collected whatever he could from and about Dostoevsky. He wrote meticulous notes about his life, and it was basically a love affair, but it was one that was it was pained. It was pained because Tsypkin was a Jew. He was of Jewish origin, and if you've read Dostoevsky, if you know a bit about him, then you'll know that Dostoevsky is not exactly cherishable towards Jews, both in his fiction, which, I mean, if you haven't read that much by him, then maybe it has escaped you. You'll find here and there, the off little comment about some little Jew in a pawn shop making an appearance, something like that. Now, if you go to his nonfiction, though, he'll write things, pleas for something to be done about, the Jewish problem and the fact that they are tarnishing Russia's purity, that kind of standard xenophobic, stereotyped, um, stereotyped, behavior that is sadly not eradicated even now. If you look at right-wing rhetoric, scapegoating, that sort of thing. But for Dostoevsky, it was the Jews, and Dostoevsky scholars are still sort of trying to understand what exactly made Dostoevsky take this stance towards the Jews. He had this kind of hatred, which you can, it's palpable, and maybe not so much in his fiction, although if you pay attention to it, then yes, you find it in his fiction as well. But definitely, it colored some of his views of the world. And for someone like me, perhaps you, who's not Jewish, it's ugly. It's ugly to see, to read about, but you don't take it personally. It's not something that gets under your skin in a sense, unless you really take the issue to heart. Which, I'm not saying that we shouldn't all, but at least it doesn't have that sense of personalness that for someone who is Jewish, it does have. It inevitably has. If you're hearing someone you love, Dostoevsky, write about how horrible these Jews are, and you happen to be one of them, he's speaking about you, and this is someone you perhaps partly idealize and look up to, and then you have to somehow take this in and accept it. Do something. You can't just ignore it because it's speaking directly to you and to who you are, and this sort of tension within Tsypkin's experience as a Jew of reading Dostoevsky, and it's not just Tsypkin. It's an interesting phenomenon that there have been throughout history since Dostoevsky so many Jewish thinkers, writers, readers who have maybe appropriated in a sense, but also have given so much attention to trying to explain it away, in a sense, this anti-Semitism in Dostoevsky, and Tsypkin, his whole novel in a way can be read as him trying to come to terms with his Dostoevsky, who would probably, if he ran into Tsypkin, give him an ugly look, because he's Jewish. And at some point in the novel, Tsypkin, wonders how it's possible that this Dostoevsky, who is in other ways so kind and concerned with all the, beaten, downtrodden people of the world, could just so blatantly hold these sort of views about a people who, a large part of their history has been one of persecution, and wasn't there any part of Dostoevsky that felt some kind of sympathy and thought, well, hey, maybe I shouldn't be so harsh, and that is part of sort of the underlying current of the novel, which I will now get into because I haven't really spoken about the novel. It's the way it's set up. It's a narrator, anonymous. You can kind of assume that it's Tsypkin himself. He is sitting on the train, going from Moscow to Leningrad, which is St. Petersburg nowadays. It was St. Petersburg in the time of Dostoevsky, and he's visiting his grandma in Petersburg and Leningrad, I should say. And he's leafing through. He opens and he's leaving through this work, which is a work now. I'm not sure in what state it was back then. It's the reminiscences, the autobiography and part biography of Anna Grigorievna Dostoevsky, who was Dostoevsky's second wife. And as he's sitting in the train, very much in sort of a stream of consciousness, kind of, words flowing as the train is moving, very beautifully written. As the narrator is sitting down, thinking about his surroundings, he sort of takes the words of Anna to heart, and they start to intermingle with his own narration, and slowly a picture starts building of their time together in Baden-Baden, and this narration is weaved together with the episodes from Dostoevsky and Anna Grigorievna's time together in Baden-Baden. Not just that, I mean, throughout the story, you get more and more of Dostoevsky's life. You get flashbacks to when he was younger, facing the death squad. You get a very, very moving scene somewhere towards the end of Dostoevsky's death. And it's I'm not going to say too much about what actually happens, just to give you a sense of what's going on. It's breathless. You can describe it as the journey. I mean, journey sounds like such a cliche, lame way to describe a story. But it is a journey. It is a journey because it's literally a journey in the train, but also through the lives of different people, and the points of contact. And it's a love story which is complicated and has some parallels. It's a love story between Dostoevsky and Anna, or should I say between Anna and Dostoevsky, which is one that is not easy, because Dostoevsky was not an easy person. He would gamble away all his belongings basically, and he would return to the hotel room and get on his knees and plead for Anna to give him something to pawn so that he would have more money in order to gamble again. He was addicted, and to the point where Anna actually pawned her wedding ring in order to finance Dostoevsky's habit. And all the while, Anna just remained loyal to Dostoevsky. She supported him through everything, whether it was, meddling family members who did not like her, most of them, through everything. She loved him, and she tried to help him. She made his life so much better. She was a kind of saint. I mean, you can argue whether, well, maybe this is just, in a sense, just the gender roles of the time, the woman had. But you do get a sense if you read the reminiscences. She did it out of love and out of respect, also for not just for Fyodor, but for his writing, his talent, his gift. She was his stenographer. That's how they met. She typed out what Dostoevsky wrote, what he narrated, what he told her to write, in order to get this book done for in a crazy publishing deal, which would get him in a lot of trouble. Maybe I'll talk about that another time. But yeah, for now, so it's a love story that is also marked kind of by this at times horrible behavior of Dostoevsky, who was a very difficult man. And there's a parallel between that relationship and the relationship between Tsypkin and Dostoevsky. Of course, they're in different times; they don't have direct contact. But the respect, the love of literature, the beauty of his writing, of his stories is all there, and it is also, in a sense, complicated by the difficulty of accepting a part of Dostoevsky, which is his anti-Semitism for Tsypkin, and so you get a very nice parallel there, and you know, the 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 novel ends. I mean, you know, I I always read introductions to works. For instance, like I love the Everyman's Library editions of classics, and but because partly because they usually have good notes and introductions and everything. I like to know everything about a work or a text that I'm going to read. But I also kind of dislike them in a sense because whenever invariably when you read the introduction, you always are told what happens in the story ending. I mean, there's always spoilers, which sometimes it's annoying. On the other hand, usually I'm not the kind of person who minds because I don't just read. Especially if you read classical literature, you don't so much read it for the story. In many cases, you already know what's going to happen anyway. And really, the sort of the beauty of the language, the way it's constructed, how you get from one point to another, you know, these are all aspects of literature, of writing, that make it worth reading. Not so much the story, although of course, I mean, it's sort of it's a minimum requirement to have a good story, but a good story in itself doesn't make for great literature. There are plenty of fairly good stories, I suppose, that you know, are poorly written and are sold at airport shops. Um, anyway, what I what I want to say is I was going to make these these videos 10 to 15 minutes. I realize now that I've already been talking for 20 minutes, and I still feel like I haven't said even the beginning of what is important here to know. Um, I do think that I've said most of the things that I wanted to say. Um, I would really recommend that you read this. It's sort of Susan Sontag's introduction is wonderful. You know, it's a passionate defense, a plea for people to read this. I don't think I can say that much more about it than she already does. But what I will say is that it's one of those books. One of the oh yeah, there's one more thing I want to say. Just bear with me, please. It's one of those books where, you know, if you haven't read The Great Gatsby, right, and someone tells you, yeah, you know, it's a great book, you should read it. Then, you know, you say, yeah, okay, I'll read it. But in a sense, you don't need to be told to read The Great Gatsby. I mean, you should know that you should read it. In a sense, you know what I mean, right? And when you read it and you find out that it's brilliant, then you know you get to be part of a very large group of people who've read The Great Gatsby and who think it's brilliant. And you know, you're part of that. And I would never. I mean, I love Fitzgerald. I have probably my second biggest collection of books is Fitzgerald's after Dostoevsky. Um, I'm not trying to take anything away there. It's just in the case of Summer in Baden-Baden, it's different because you're reading something that has been largely ignored, something that is so beautiful. You're reading it, and you have it's another dimension. You're wondering to yourself, why hasn't every person, you know, not I wouldn't say in the world, because I mean there are plenty of people who for whatever reason wouldn't want to read it or wouldn't appreciate it that much without like value judgments. I mean, I mean, maybe some people would be, you know, I hate this word, but would be bored by it, I suppose, you know. But I'm just saying, people who love literature, there are plenty of them. Maybe you love literature, you haven't read Summer in Baden-Baden, and you know, you wonder like, and you feel like you read it and you just feel excited to tell people about it. Well, that's what I'm doing here now. One thing that I still want to say is that Tsypkin, he wrote this, and I mean, he was meticulous in his notes. He wanted everything in this work of his to be absolutely factual and accurate. So he did an immense amount of research about Dostoevsky. Everything, you know, had to be the way it actually was for Dostoevsky. He didn't leave the country for all this, or he didn't, at least during this time, he didn't go to Baden-Baden. He didn't know. I mean, he didn't know how it was like. So all his description is actually from his own readings, his own research, and it's all very accurate and it all fits, which is just something that's so it's special. You don't find it that often. I mean, nowadays you can, you have so much. You can go on YouTube. You can find videos about any place you want. You can do research pictures, all of that. It was more difficult back then, especially in a closed society that the Soviet Union was. And he did all this research, and he wrote without expecting it to be published. He could have published it maybe within, the circle of writers that were around at that time, which were heavily censored and had all these difficulties in terms of getting their writing out. But they were there, they exist. But he didn't want to do that. He didn't want to do that. He kept it to himself. He kept it in his drawer, in his desk drawer, and he really just wrote for the love of literature, out of love for Dostoevsky and literature. And you feel it as he's writing. You feel sort of the struggle, the love, the doubt, the fairness. Also, that he's not idolizing Dostoevsky in a sense. He's actually quite objective. He stresses, or he doesn't stress, but just in his carefully chosen anecdotes from his life and his interactions with his wife and with people, for instance, with Turgenev, who he tried to borrow money from, or he actually asked to borrow money in Baden-Baden, which he did, and then he felt horrible about it. And I mean, the way it just, he could be base sometimes, he could be mean, Dostoevsky, and he doesn't deny that it's not an idealization of Dostoevsky. And I think that that is quite a feat in and of itself. And it's I've my own passion for Dostoevsky and has led me to want to read everything by him and about him. I've read his fiction. I'm still going through his nonfiction. I'm also trying to read works about him, which is sort of what I feel is the next step. You read a person's fiction, maybe some nonfiction in there as well. Sorry. And then you get to the secondary literature, to what people wrote about them, in order to, is there anything that people have seen, have thought about that I haven't? Are they accurate in their descriptions and their characterizations? That's the next step. So in that sort of urge to read and know everything about a person, which I have for a couple of my absolute favorite writers. That's how I found this one. It's also how I found another book, Master of Petersburg by Kutse, which is more of like a fantasy. It's not supposed to be factual. It's more of like I said, like a fantasy about Dostoevsky's life. It's not as good. I mean, I might do a review about it sometime. I don't think it's nearly as good. It's more of the the novelist setting himself a task of getting into the head of Dostoevsky and doing what he can to sort of make it a certain way. I didn't appreciate that particularly. This is Summer in Baden-Baden. Tsypkin is more sincere. I feel he's more sincere, not just because of the details of his life. He feels more sincere, and it's absolutely beautifully written. There are passages that you read it, and I might actually just read. I actually wrote I wrote out a passage here, if I can find it, which I will read out to you, just as maybe one last way to entice you to read it. If I can find it, that is. I have all these notes which I was actually going to use in order to give you all the facts, all the details about the book and the life, but I didn't use them in the end, which is kind of the story of my life. The way I prepare presentations, I write down everything I want to say, all the details, and in the end, I wing it, because in a sense, I know what's important to share, and I hope that I've been able to convey this to you. I have found the passage. So if you'll excuse me, if you'll permit me to read out this part, it's relatively short. So what Tsypkin writes in the in the beginning, when he's on the train, well, where I should say when the narrator is on the train, he writes, the carriage was hot, but when the train finally got underway, it became a little cooler, and sailing past the windows were the red brick buildings with their tiled roofs, and in the distance the green-covered mountains, one of them with the Altes and Neues Schloss, and the rock faces jutting over them. And now that they were leaving this place, never to return, she could see the beauty of it, as she had when they approached it for the first time, the city surrounded by mountains, with the Rhine gleaming blue somewhere in the distance, and for a moment she felt sad. Parting everywhere is death, wrote Marina Tsvetaeva, sorry for that pronunciation, describing the feeling of sorrow which I, for example, experience when leaving even the most unpleasant habitation, probably because I know that I shall never return again. Right? You see, and I take this point from James Wood, who actually wrote a very good summary of the book, and he points out here, the way the narration goes from the narrator, the anonymous narrator in the train, to Anna, to Anna's reminiscences of when they were moving in the train, in Germany and moving away there, back to, for example, experiencing the experience that I have, leaving even the most unpleasant habitation. It brings it back again, and it's also seamless. It's just a moving, almost a dreamlike way of going through the world, through these stories, which is remarkable. You don't find that much. Perhaps also, I don't know if it was James Wood, but you do find it, for instance, in Thomas Bernhardt's work. This kind of stream of consciousness, in long run-on, sentences. You find. That's my cat wanting to go in the closet. You find, so in these long sentences, you find going from idea, layer within layer, moving from, perspective to perspective. It creates this kind of beautiful, almost never-ending image. If there's one thing, if you haven't read anything by Dostoevsky or very little, then sorry, I'll just open this door for my cat, or she's going to keep meowing. If you don't know much or haven't read much by Dostoevsky and don't know much about his life, then maybe you'll find yourself, when you're reading this, wanting to know more about it, because Tsypkin does allude to situations, instances from Dostoevsky's life, which aren't always self-explanatory, perhaps. The assumption is kind of that if you're going to read this, you do care about Dostoevsky, or you at least know a little bit about him. It's you can read up a little bit on Dostoevsky if you want. I do think the story itself already gives you quite a bit, and you can go from there. So it's not something that I would say, will deter or should deter someone from reading the book. If anything, perhaps it can spur on your love of Dostoevsky. Yeah, I think that's all I say for now. I've been talking for more than half an hour. I intended it to be short, but that's how it goes. Thank you so much for watching, and feel free to leave feedback about possible reviews that you'd like me to do, topics to speak about. I can talk about both particular books and authors at large, yeah, I might make that personal video to tell you a little bit about why I read, my background, what I study, etc., to give you a bit more of a sense of where I'm coming from, perhaps. So yeah, thanks again. Bye.